Who will be our enemy in 10, 15, 20 years? Spoiler, it's going to be still Russia.
Definitely someone in Kremlin has intentions to poke NATO.
There is no one in the world who's as good at fighting drones, dealing with electronic warfare as the Ukrainians.
If Europeans were to ask Ukraine for help, what would that help actually look like? Is it a question of keeping Russian troops tied up on the battlefield in Ukraine, or is there more to it?
Instead of us talking about what Ukraine needs from Europe, perhaps we should start thinking what we in Europe need from Ukraine.
Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Doha. Since Donald Trump launched his war on Iran, Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been touring the Gulf, but he's not been asking them for support. He's been offering Ukrainian help, drone deals. That dynamic has attracted attention closer to home, where military planners are feeling anxious about Russia. Germany's top general has repeatedly warned that Moscow will be ready to attack NATO within 3 years.
As Europe prepares to defend itself without significant US backup, could the solutions to Europeans' problems have been staring them in the face all along? Are they in Kyiv?
There is a tendency now in the West to see Ukraine rather as a burden. It's this prism of Ukraine as just a recipient. It consumes the resources of the West rather than giving something back. And I think this is actually a very distorted logic.
Lesia Ogrysko is a defense expert and serves as director of the Sahaydatchny Security Center in Kyiv.
There is no significant progress on the battlefield. It's not because Russia is weak, but it's about Ukraine's strength, and because Ukraine has mastered this next generation warfare. And I think it's really important for European countries to be a little bit more self-critical and understand that they would most probably not perform as well as the Ukrainians do. If you're thinking strategically and more geopolitically in terms of what war are we preparing for the next 10, 15, and 20 years? Who will be our enemy in 10, 15, 20 years? Spoiler, it's going to be still Russia.
So that's the view from Kyiv, and you'd be forgiven for saying so far, so predictable, but it's something that's being echoed by important voices across NATO. Finland's president, who has one of Europe's best prepared armies and a 1,300-kilometre land border with Russia, had this to say.
There's not one military in Europe or the United States, for that matter, that is capable to conduct modern warfare in the way in which Ukraine is doing now.
Those same worries about NATO's readiness are shared in nearby Latvia. Latvia's regular army has under 10,000 troops and has hundreds of kilometers of border with Russia and Belarus to defend. Add a significant Russian-speaking minority into the mix, which the Kremlin likes to claim needs its protection, and it's no wonder many in Latvia believe they could be next after Ukraine. This is General Kaspars Pudens. He's head of Latvia's armed forces. We spoke to the general at the Kyiv Security Forum. Pudens says that while Ukraine is grounding most of Russia's forces for now, buying the rest of Europe time, that won't last for long, because Russia is rearming fast.
If I would be sitting in the Kremlin, I would say my opportunity is now, it was in years 27, 28, 29, when we as a NATO are not fully ready. So still using this opportunity, because I think after 2030, it might close as a window of opportunity. Even Russia will grow stronger, but at the same time also Europe, NATO, European Union supporting NATO with capability development will grow much more stronger, not only as armed forces, but I mean as a whole.
Pudens has no doubts about Putin's desire to move beyond Ukraine once he can.
Definitely someone in Kremlin has intentions to poke NATO or even to seize some ground and punish us in the Baltic states and in Latvia. We are on their list of grievances, of their list of punishment. They would not probably forgive us of going away from their sphere of influence, joining NATO in EU.
So if we accept Putin's hypothesis that Russia has the intention to at least, quote, poke NATO, and that from 2027, Russia will be in a position to open a second front, several years before NATO is in a position to respond, what can Ukraine offer the rest of Europe apart from tying up as many Russian troops on its territory as possible?
It might seem obvious, but I think it's probably worth restating. No one serving in a NATO army right now has ever seen or participated in a war like this. Today's commanders got their experience in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. The last war of this scale and intensity in Europe was World War II.
All European armies can do to prepare for what might be coming is to study what's happening in Ukraine and change their training accordingly, and put themselves through war games and exercises. Often that's against frontline Ukrainian troops playing the opponent's all-red team. What's alarming is that the Europeans often lose. In war games organised by Germany's military and Die Welt newspaper, a team playing Russia cut the Baltic states off from Poland in a matter of days, using drones, mines and tanks backed up by nuclear threats. It ended with Washington agreeing to Moscow's demands, while German troops stationed in Lithuania to prevent exactly this scenario didn't even engage in battle. It doesn't look much better on the training grounds of NATO's eastern flank. The Wall Street Journal reported that Ukrainian drone operators seconded from the front lines resoundingly beat NATO troops during the Hedgehog 2025 exercises in Estonia. The Ukrainians were invited to test NATO troops' readiness for drone warfare. Turns out they weren't ready at all, and were trying to fight as if drones couldn't see everything they were doing. The Wall Street Journal reports that one of the Ukrainian units of 10 drone operators destroyed 17 armoured vehicles and launched a further 30 strikes in just half a day. One of the Estonians who took part told the Wall Street Journal that the Ukrainian-led team had been, quote, able to destroy 2 battalions in a day. As sobering as these results might be, Casper Putin says that lessons are being learnt.
No one asked what's happened next, and as far as I know, already next day, same unit, didn't they make the same mistake and actually achieved their goals. We have constantly our soldiers coming here, going to front lines, meeting with combat leaders, but at the same time Ukrainians coming down to us, looking at our plans, at our concepts, giving their advice, maybe critiques about what we did, so we can do it much better.
Whenever Volodymyr Zelenskyy goes abroad these days, be it to the Gulf, Norway or Berlin, Ukrainian drone startup executives are never far behind, offering their solutions and looking for investment to ramp up production.
If you're someone who follows Russia's war on Ukraine closely, it can feel like every week a new drone is launched that can fly, travel and sail faster and further than its predecessors. It can all feel very incremental. But if you take a step back from all the noise and the press releases, the change over the last few years has been breathtaking.
Drones now account for 70% of frontline casualties. Ukraine's deep strike drones are hitting oil refineries over 1,500 kilometers deep inside Russia, and they're chasing Russia's shadow oil tanker fleet as far as the Mediterranean. Ukraine didn't innovate out of choice. It went big on drones because it ran out of other options. Its artillery was consistently outgunned, its navy was tiny, and its long-range missiles were long gone, either scrapped or handed over to Russia in exchange for gas in the early 2000s. Unlike Ukraine, most big European countries still have legacy systems, functioning navy and cruise missiles. And that's why so far they've been treating drones as an add-on rather than the main game. But there are 2 problems the rest of Europe shares with Ukraine: air defense and a lack of new recruits. And that might prove to be the decisive argument for European armies to learn from Ukraine's experience with drones and act on it. Every time a Russian Shahed drone overshoots Ukraine's borders and enters NATO airspace, whether on purpose or by mistake, the picture is pretty much the same. Multi-million euro F-16 jets, armed with interceptor missiles that can cost up to hundreds of thousands of euros each, track drones thought to cost just 20,000 euros to produce. Till now, the NATO countries bordering Ukraine have chosen not to shoot down Russian drones to avoid the accusation that they're parties to this war, and for fear of falling debris hitting people on the ground. But if they needed to, could European countries shoot these drones down reliably at a price that even makes sense? If Russia can launch hundreds of Shaheds at Ukraine in a day now, what kind of barrage will it be able to send in a few years' time? Reports of Gulf countries burning through years' worth of costly Patriot interceptors to shoot down Iran's cheap Shahed drones have focused minds in Europe. It's a problem President Zelenskyy has a ready-made solution for: drone deals. At its core, it's about these Ukrainian interceptor drones, taking out Russia's cheap Shaheds with even cheaper Ukrainian interceptor drones, rather than sending up fighter jets or wasting expensive ground-to-air missiles. It's a comparatively simple drone, supported by advanced software and AI to ensure it reaches its target. Countries that sign a drone deal with Ukraine won't just be able to buy these drones, they'll also be able to produce them at home using Ukrainian technology under license. And they'll get the software and insights into Ukraine's battlefield experience of using them.
When we're we're talking about drone technology, you also have to understand that it's not just talking about mastering of how to fly the drone. It's about the whole ecosystem that is being built around the next generation warfare. It's the satellites, it's the platforms, it's the electronic warfare. We have a very capable defense industry that can be the answer to this challenge. But we have just met our glass ceiling in terms of financing, and this is why one of the most persistent requests from Ukraine to our European or Western partners is to support us financially in scaling Ukraine's defense industry.
Even with an increasingly unpopular draft, Ukraine is struggling to keep up with the number of soldiers Russia is sending to the battlefield. And that's where land drones come in. Ukraine has used them to carry supplies and evacuate wounded soldiers for several years. What's changed is that they're now, at least on occasion, being used to take land back. Ukraine's military released these images purporting to show land drones retaking a position in Kharkiv region without putting humans in harm's way. That's raised hopes across Ukraine that infantry losses could soon fall, and with them the need to enlist ever more soldiers and put them in deadly situations.
This development has been quite impressive. I do believe that it will help to reduce the need for soldiers at specific points in the front line, and it will save lives. It will allow not send people when you don't have to.
Ulrike Franke researches the future of warfare at the European Council on Foreign Relations in Paris.
You do need people to service these systems, to maintain these systems. I definitely think the land drones are going to help reduce the risk to soldiers and the number of soldiers you may need for a certain operation.
Even so, that's a much simpler proposition than finding 21st century recruits for trench warfare. Ukraine has already found it much easier to recruit drone operators than infantry soldiers. Kasper Putin says boots on the ground will still be needed.
These technologies currently help to hold the line, not letting Russians further on, but I know that in the near future these technologies will also help to regain territory, regain the ground for Ukrainians.
Do you think that is a potential scenario where you have basically land drones and drones in the air instead of infantry soldiers taking back territory?
Infantry will still remain as one who will come in, seize the ground, bring a flag if it's needed to seize the terrain, liberate the terrain. It will be the one, but it will be very much supported and augmented his capabilities, his reach out, his protection.
What's clear is that drones are only as effective as the commands they're given. The human operators are often overwhelmed by the flood of data they're receiving from all the sensors on the battlefield. If you spend any time with Ukrainian drone crews on the front lines, you'll witness operators losing drones because they can't effectively communicate directions with other humans, which is where AI comes in.
We need to transfer the mission command concept from people mindset, from human brains, into the brains of these autonomous systems.
And that's something that's realistic within the next couple of years? That's not tens of years away?
I think it's maybe even less than years.
And there we have it. The killer robots are nearly upon us. Not everyone, though, is convinced that AI will be used that way. Ulrike Franke is skeptical that legal autonomy is coming anytime soon. But not because the technology is infeasible or because of ethical concerns.
So right now we can see that the technology is basically there to have what most would call fully autonomous weapon systems. You can have the technology of having a system basically finding a target and destroying this target without any meaningful human control. So far this is used rarely, mainly because military commanders don't like to give up control if they don't have to. There is no interest in kind of machine autonomy just for the sake of it.
One thing most analysts would agree on is that AI is great at making sense of the huge flood of data coming in from the modern battlefield. There are now so many cameras on the ground and in the air that trying to make sense of it all is overwhelming for a human brain, even on the lowest operational level, let alone for commanders trying to get a sense of the bigger picture.
Ukraine has Delta, a battlefield management platform that can be used on a mobile phone, a laptop, or in a command center. It combines video from drones and satellite imagery to create a real-time map of what's happening on the battlefield. It shows Ukrainian commanders what resources they have and uses AI to scour incoming images for Russian targets, even camouflaged ones that a human eye would often miss. It analyzes past Russian tactics to predict how Russian troops will respond, and then it helps direct Ukraine's drones or other weapons to their target. And if that wasn't enough, it ranks the Ukrainian units using it by their effectiveness, enabling feedback and adjustments in strategy. Most European countries are very far from having anything like it. Germany wants to create its own platform, but without involving controversial US AI companies such as Palantir that have long been active in Ukraine. But to build their own systems and train their own AI, countries like Germany will need vast amounts of battlefield data, which once again only Ukraine has. During his most recent visit to Kyiv in May 2026, Germany's Defense Minister Boris Pistorius went out of his way to thank Ukraine for sharing that data and underlined its importance.
Die Daten, die die Ukraine jetzt im 5. Jahr auf dem Gefechtsfeld sammelt, durch Einsatz von Luftverteidigung, von Drohnen, sind Daten, die sonst niemand hat. Aber die Daten sind da und daraus nicht zu lernen, wäre fahrlässig mit Blick auf die Sicherheit des übrigen Europas.
And it's not just data about 21st century drone warfare, it's data on how Russia chooses to fight.
Speaking, there are two types of data that Ukraine has now. One is simply data about fighting. This kind of data hasn't been collected for, like decades. And then the second type of data is specifically on kind of Russian fighting, Russian capabilities, Russian military capabilities, how systems operate, how they're being used, all this kind of stuff. This can then also be quite valuable, especially to Europeans, which, depending on this, how war ends, may be preparing a possible future attack by Russia. So having data on how do Russian troops operate and how do they move certain systems and all of that, that can be very, very, very useful for any kind of future military operation.
The European government's really willing to learn the lessons of the war in Ukraine. They've certainly boosted their defence spending significantly in many cases, but are they going to spend that money on the kinds of systems that Ukraine's pioneered? A group of leading economists and defence experts in Germany has warned that for all the praise of Ukrainian innovation, their government is ploughing vast sums of money into more of what they already have. They cite figures according to which Germany spent 99% of its first €100 billion special defence fund on legacy systems, on backfilling equipment that in some cases had been in use for decades. Not only that, but they also criticise the concentration of defence contracts in the hands of a few big players. The figures they cite suggest that 70% of European defence spending goes to the 10 biggest players. By comparison, in the US, that figure is under 30%. Which brings us to German arms giant Rheinmetall, or rather, its CEO, Armin Papperger. Papperger provoked outrage in Ukraine when he told Atlantic magazine he thought Ukraine's drone sector was the work of, quote, housewives, using 3D printers in their kitchens. This is how to play with Legos, he said, before questioning, what is the innovation of Ukraine?
It sounded very dismissive of what the Ukrainians are doing. I think maybe to some extent this even came out of a certain fear that Rheinmetall has towards these kind of new startups that are doing things differently, that are doing kind of agile and easy things. I mean, some of these drones are indeed kind of easy to build together, but that's not a weakness. That's a strength. That's what you want. But of course, there's less money in this. And so I think the big players, even Rheinmetall, which of course is gaining massively in recent months, are slightly worried that the defense market is changing and are maybe therefore pushing back a little bit on that.
The response from Ukraine's miltech scene was near unanimous. They said Papperger and other policymakers in Europe simply didn't understand.
Over the past couple of decades, the Europeans or the West have been rather building their military doctrines and their thinking and betting on very expensive, very exquisite platforms that would bring them technological edge.
In this new world of military startups, drones are measured on what they can do on the battlefield, not the novelty of their design. Systems being simple and easy to put together, like Lego, is an advantage, not a problem.
Mass indeed matters again. I think Russia's aggression against Ukraine has demonstrated that mass production and having something in huge quantities is still a very important part of warfare. You still need the rounds, the military shells, the artillery shells, sorry. You still need millions of drones. You still need millions of interceptors. You still need to have a defense industry that is able to scale the production and spare parts. And most importantly, we are not talking about boutique armies anymore. Everything that we are seeing now in the Gulf, and how those very cheap drones are being intercepted by extremely expensive Patriot missiles, etc.
That can create a massive imbalance in how much a war costs the sides to pursue and how long a government can continue to fight. What matters isn't complexity or unique technologies, but the ability to update and adjust systems to suit a changing reality on the battlefield. A prime example was the cat-and-mouse game playing out on the battlefield between drone pilots and electronic warfare units. As jamming technology spread, drone pilots had to keep changing antennas and frequencies to keep operating. Eventually, many switched to fiber optic cable drones that can't be jammed.
Many in the West still don't understand how important adaptability and the speed of innovation cycles, the feedback loop that happens from the front line back to the lab and then back to the front line in just a couple of weeks, and not talking about years, how it's usually done in Europe. When we're talking about innovative defense procurement techniques, where you allow brigades to procure directly from a producer, not going via centralized, more rigid procedures.
Military units buying directly from weapons manufacturers would be unthinkable in most of Europe. Critics of Germany's military procurement office say it's simply too slow and prioritizes legal compliance over making sure Germany's armed forces have what they need when they need it. Across much of Europe, governments operate independently rather than pooling resources and ordering together at scale.
But then you also need to realize that Europe, apart from Ukraine, is still a continent at peace, at least in our kind of perception. There's hybrid warfare, but there's no kind of military warfare. And that means that, just processes, especially bureaucratic processes, procurement processes, are still, following a certain peacetime logic, even though there is urgency.
General Kaspers Putin says that where previously military technology drove innovation that then later trickled down to civilian industries, now it's the other way around. Commercial technology, with its shorter development cycles, is pushing military development. And military planners need to learn from the commercial side and to take risks and be willing to fail sometimes, says Putin.
Sometimes we might make mistakes by procuring probably not fully tested, but mainly quickly implemented new system to be ready to accept this risk.
Ukrainians haven't had the time or the resources to go after the perfect equipment or technology that Kasper Putin warns Europe is still too often pursuing. Short on alternatives, Ukraine's military has been willing to try things out and willing to fail on occasion. It's decentralized to a degree, allowing individual units to go their own way and source what they think they need. In the process, they've shown the rest of Europe and the world a number of things. Most fundamentally, what 21st century all-out war can look like. And how a society in which anyone's home could be hit by drones on any night, no matter how far they live from the front lines, can keep going for years. Ukraine has led the way in developing cheap drones that can be easily adapted to meet changing demands and produced at volume. It's shown the rest of Europe the age of boutique armies, as Lesia Ogresko puts it, with small stocks of eye-wateringly expensive kit, is over. And, short on new recruits, Ukraine is figuring out how to put drones instead of people in harm's way on the battlefield. Ukraine has harnessed AI to make the most of the flood of information gathered on a battlefield where sensors are everywhere. In the process, it's accumulated a data set no one else has. Ukraine knows and can show the rest of Europe how Russia fights, and it can use that data to train the rest of Europe's AI models. All that knowledge and experience has come at a terrible price. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have been killed or wounded, millions of civilians have fled abroad, and a fifth of the country's territory remains under Russian occupation. To bolster its battered economy, Ukraine has opened up weapons exports, even as it continues to fight Russia. And Europeans, as well as others with drone deals, can now buy Ukrainian expertise. But more than any one piece of technology, what Ukraine shows is that it's fitting it all together that counts, and being able and willing to constantly adapt and adjust. Ukrainian troops have exposed Europe's blind spots in exercises and provided advice on how to fix them. Speaking in Kyiv in May 2026, Germany's Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said that rather than just buy existing Ukrainian solutions, Germany would fund joint ventures between German and Ukrainian military startups. Germany would be joining Ukraine's BRAVE initiative. The big question is, will Pistorius, Germany and the rest of Europe be brave enough to challenge the vested interests back home and actually learn from the lessons Ukraine can offer?